All right, we've got some big developments going on with Mike Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow, and his ongoing legal saga against Dominion voting systems for a bunch of stuff related to the 2020 presidential election and what happened in the aftermath. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with what's been going on. But a brief recap, Dominion is suing Mike Lindell and his company for $1.3 billion due to statements Mike made about Dominion and their participation in what he described as improper for the presidential election. Okay, so they're suing him for defamation and interference with business stuff, and that is a big lawsuit. But Mike has made two big announcements. Let's talk about him. I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a legal and political commentator here on YouTube. And so if you like that type of stuff, hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell right next to it so you don't miss any of these videos, okay? Mike Lindell has now announced that he is going to countersue Dominion. Both he and MyPillow are countersuing Dominion. This is coming on the heels of his announcement that he has also added prominent First Amendment constitutional scholar Alan Dershowitz to his legal team. Now, to be clear, Mike Lindell said he's up to about 12 lawyers now, including Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz has said that he is advising the other lawyers in a limited capacity on the First Amendment issues. So it's not like we're going to see Dershowitz in court arguing on behalf of Mike Lindell or MyPillow. And in fact, we may not see him even writing any briefs or drafts or of anything like that, but merely in an advisory role. And guys, this is what billionaire lawfare looks like. You've got high-paid, prominent attorneys who will be going to war in a very public way on both sides of this. And it should be really interesting to watch. Let's take a look at this article from Newsweek. It's going to be down in the description below if you want to read all of it, because we're not going to look at everything, but there's some interesting stuff going on with his legal theories that he's forwarding against Dominion. So, Lindell was hit with a $1.3 billion defamation lawsuit by Dominion last month after repeatedly claiming that the company was involved in a massive voter fraud conspiracy that moved votes in the 2020 presidential election from former President Donald Trump to President Joe Biden. To be clear, this is a news story from Newsweek. I am just reading it. I am not advancing any particular claims about voter anything in relation to the 2020 elections. I think everybody's minds are already made up on this issue, and I don't feel any particular need to advocate for or against that position. If you guys want to talk about it down in the comments, feel free to do so, but I'm letting YouTube know here that I'm not making any claim. I'm reporting factually on this story, and I'm much more interested in the defamation legal issue and the countersuit theories by Mike Lindell, okay? It's really stupid and pathetic that we have to be such a, we have to tiptoe around these issues so carefully that we can't talk about news stories without these big disclaimers, but that's where YouTube is right now. So that's what I got to do, folks. During an appearance on the latest edition of former Trump advisor Steve Bannon's War Room Pandemic podcast, Lindell announced his plans to legally strike back, claiming that the voting machine company had violated his First Amendment rights, the First Amendment rights of all Americans, as well as federal anti-racketeering laws. And this is an interesting approach. I like it. I don't know how effective it's going to be. Going after companies on RICO is really, really, that's the racketeering, basically. The racketeering, anti-racketeering statute is RICO. Going after companies on RICO almost never works, but it is an interesting approach, and it certainly could, be effective in the overall fight for MyPillow. And we'll talk about what that overall fight looks like in just a little bit. You're also going to have MyPillow going after Dominion in a countersuit, and that's going to your First Amendment speech. You're going to have me go after them, countersuing them, Lindell said. There are two cases. One will be MyPillow, one will be Mike Lindell. We're both going after them. They're a little bit different because one of them, what Dominion did was violate the First Amendment rights of everyone in this country by using bullying lawsuits and RICO law. So what he's suggesting, he says it right here. What they say to news outlets is, if you let this guy on, we're going to sue you too, he added. That's racketeering. That goes back to the mafia days. So that's interesting. The theory here is that Dominion is engaged in anti-competitive practices in regards to the media by threatening to chill the speech of the media or people they might interview to prevent them from having Mike Lindell on. And in doing so, they're being anti-competitive by using these coercive threats. So whether or not that's going to be effective, I'm going to lean towards not really effective in court. However, they don't necessarily have to be effective because it's not always about winning a lawsuit outright. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. On the same podcast, Lindell announced that celebrity lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who represented Trump during his first impeachment trial, was joining his legal team. Lindell said that Dershowitz described his upcoming legal battle as one of the biggest cases, if not the biggest case in the history for free speech for the First Amendment. And there are real First Amendment issues here. Again, whatever you think about Mike Lindell, whatever you think about MyPillow, heck, whatever you think about Dominion and the 2020 election, it doesn't really matter. A bunch of people spoke their mind on the 2020 election. And what we saw in the wake of that were news organizations, politicians, and other people, including Dominion, trying to use various processes to silence what should be protected speech. Look, this is ultimately, at the end of the day, one of the most important things we do as Americans, and that's vote every 4 years. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that, and that is quintessential political speech. It's at the very, very core of what the First Amendment protects, and that is this idea that we get to voice displeasure or pleasure with government, its processes, and its agents. Is Dominion an agent of the state? There's a lot to say yes, and there's some really tricky case law around that, and we're going to have to see that case law play out in court as this thing goes. Of course, I'll be watching all of this as it develops because I find this case to be fascinating. Whether Alan Dershowitz says it's one of the biggest cases of all time, that it definitely is big in number, and it very well could be one of the biggest cases in history because it could define our limits of political speech going forward in the context of an amendment that says that those limits really shouldn't exist. And that is an interesting place to be, in my opinion. But let's briefly talk about what those things are I was mentioning earlier. It's not always about winning a lawsuit, and it's even less about winning a lawsuit when you are a billionaire or a public company and you have a public media fight. And this is getting bigger and bigger and more commonplace with the advent of social media and the idea of this sort of viral marketing that goes on social media. One of the big accusations that Dominion has against Mike Lindell is that he is maintaining his position on their involvement in alleged fraud to sell pillows. Well, if that's the case, then this isn't as much of a legal cost as it is a marketing cost, and the entire purpose is less about winning the lawsuit and more about preserving the brand, maintaining the engagement from the customer, and showing really, and this is to the credit of Mike Lindell, by the way, and this is not a criticism, but showing that he legitimately believes what he is saying and he is willing to fight for his right to say it. And that is an important distinction that's going on here. And like I said, when you're dealing with very wealthy people or large companies and they have a public image to maintain, part of the lawfare that's going on isn't about whether or not you win the case or even can win the case. If he can credibly put into the minds of the American people that what Dominion is doing is wrong because it resembles those mafia tactics, it's a type of racketeering, it's an organized criminal action against people's right to speak. If he can do that, and if he can successfully distribute that idea to people who support him, then Mike Lindell can win even if he doesn't win the underlying case. Because that's a really tough claim to prove out legally, but it's a lot easier to convince people that's what's going on because, by the way, it kind of looks like that's what's going on. Whether or not it's legal, it's pretty hard to argue that Dominion threatened to sue several different news agencies who had people like Mike Lindell, Rudy Giuliani, and others coming on their program to talk about the allegations against Dominion. And this is supposed to be a free country with free political speech, and it sure looked like Dominion was trying to stamp out any speech against it, and it's using this idea of defamation to do it. But for the defamation to stick, it has to be a lie. And Mike Lindell and others are still saying, even to their own current detriment, that it's not. So we'll see what's going on. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Would love to hear from you, and we'll talk soon. Have a good day. Peace. Peace.